Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Ron. We're veteran game designers who worked on the Dungeon Crawler Carl RPG.
We named this podcast after the Dungeon Anarchist cookbook because we tell you how the game works and how to make the game work for you.
And now, on to the episode.
All right, we're back for episode 16.
John, I need to interrupt. I need to tell you something kind of urgent.
Oh, okay.
It's about me. It's about my name. It's Ron Lundeen, and that I'm an employee of Wizards of the Coast. But you know what? The opinions I express here are mine, not theirs.
Wow, that is, I'm so glad you caught me on that before we said anything, Ron.
Exactly. Phew. All right, now.
Well, wait. Before we go on, we should say we are now an officially sponsored Dungeon Crawler Carl RPG podcast, and the opinions we express here are our own, not Renegades, though they are
That's right.
They are great supporters and did give us access to a preview copy of the core rulebook, which now we can share parts of, and we are today.
And we are. Now, this is the core rulebook. To remind you, we've got the starter box, which is floors 1 and 2. And the core rulebook is covering everything from floors 3, 4, and 5, which includes race and class selection. It's everything that happens on those floors. Ton of stuff in this huge, huge book.
Right. And it's due to come out here in the next several weeks. So we're open to everybody who backed it gets their hands on it. But until then, I know a lot of people are anxious to get going and building their campaigns. So I mentioned to the marketing folks, I said, hey, can we show people how to make mobs and bosses so they can start populating their dungeons at least? And they said, sure. So here we are.
Excellent. Well, let's dig right in about making mobs and bosses.
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to say that this section is in Chapter 5 of the core rulebook. It's at Chapter 5 is on game mastering, and this is near the end of it. So I'm going to be showing kind of excerpts of it, mostly so they kind of fit on our little panel, which will go between our talking heads when I actually render this to make it easier for people to see. But we shall begin.
So we've heard you. We've heard people say, "Hey, the text is too small. I can't see it." So we're trying to be more careful about making sure that you can see what's there, take your screenshots, etc.
Yes. All right. So the chapter starts off with, or this section of the chapter talks about, hey, create your own mobs and bosses. Give some general advice on kind of relative power. So it depends on what floor you're on and what category of mob or what category of boss you have. And one of the things that's interesting here that they mention is that a mob that might be on a lower floor, say a floor 5 or 6 or maybe 15, could end up being a boss at one of the floors like 1, 2, or 3. Well, if you're on 15, that mob probably is a boss all the way up there. So even so, if you take a mob and switch it to a boss, as you'll see, there are some changes that get made in terms of the number of stat points it has and the number of health bar slots it has. But still,
and then in play, the number of attacks that they get.
Yes, because a mob only gets 2 actions, 1 attack, 1 movement, versus a boss gets a number of attacks equal to the number of crawlers that are in the party attacking it. And the other thing I'll say, the title of this is Creating Your Own Mobs and Bosses. We're not going to explicitly talk about elites, but one of the things that I decided, and everybody said it was okay, is that basically when we build elites, we build them the same as a neighborhood boss. So in terms of stats and health bar slots and all that sorts of things. So if for some reason you're on one of the School of Pentra floors 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, which we haven't seen yet, then on those floors, elites do show up. And if you want to put elites on those floors, that's how you would build them. So kind of some general advice there.
Yep.
All right. So you're coming up with a general concept for your boss. One of the first things I like to do is come up with a name. And oftentimes this will be a name that is a twist on a popular meme or a combination of things. So if you think of like Crack Karen or danger dingoes, so it takes kind of some sort of critter and it adds something onto it. And like in one of my neighborhoods I put together, I built, and one that we're playing through in the playtest right now. My neighborhood boss is Jack Screecher because I'm a big Jack Reacher fan, and it happens to take place in a um,
Skyfowl City.
Skyfowl settlement. So I thought, oh, let's have a big old buff boss named Jack Screecher, and so he's in here as well. But come up with a name can be indicative of maybe the type of creature it is, or the type of abilities or attacks, or something really, really crazy.
Right. There's also, when you're putting the names for specifically Dungeon Crawler Carl things, there's a lot of naming conventions that show up in a lot of fantasy fiction. Okay, you got trolls, but you also have forest trolls, or you have ice trolls, or cave trolls. Well, this is exactly the kind of game where you could also have troll nerds or booger trolls or whatever weirdness you want to put on. This sort of subverts that serious naming conventions to be something that's a little bit silly, or a lot of bit silly for that matter.
Yeah, and when you are working, say, in a neighborhood or in an area where there's a lot of kind of related creatures, you can build a family of trolls and give them, all different abilities, slightly different jobs within that ecosystem, and kind of give their name prefix, right, related to whatever that job is. So you might have, the trash picker troll and the eye plucker troll and the bouncer, whatever you want to do. So come up with something fun and creative. And one of the things that Matt Dinman says is that this is not D&D. Don't use a D&D type term when you're naming your creatures in Dungeon Crawler Carl. No offense meant, Ron.
No, that's fine. The opinions I express here are mine and not theirs. Yes. But there's also a little bit of punniness you can have with it. You mentioned an eye sucker troll, right? That can either be a troll that genuinely grabs your face and sucks your eyes out, or someone that picks up big slabs of ice or icicles and hurls them at people. It's an ice hucker troll. Okay. So you can have any number of punny things that you're able to do to subvert that a little bit. That's why it's disaster, actually, and a terror to be at any table I run, because I'm always trying to make twists like that.
Well, and what I like about this game as well is that, when you put an Easter egg, like you allude to something in another game system, oftentimes my developers slap me down for that and say, no, bad. Here, that's okay. In fact, it's kind of expected to make those sort of kind of connections.
Yep, or to the real world or real world lore, because the world dungeon is based on our Earth. If you've got a mob that is in something that looks a little bit like a DeLorean to make short jumps through time, that is, at least within the world, very sensible, even though that wouldn't fly in anything like a fantasy world.
Yes, for sure. All right, so name your mob. Next one, you got to come up with a size. And if it's a humanoid, you can have the basic medium size, which is 4. If you want to make it a little bit smaller, make it petite, 3. If you want to make it a lot bigger, you can make it large, 5, huge, 6, so on and so forth. Now, there are rules that cause very large creatures to be slightly easier to hit and very small creatures to be slightly smaller to hit. But these come into play when there's a difference of 4+, I think is what we finally settled on. So if you are a size 4 medium creature, it's not a really huge deal.
Yeah. This lets you play into or against type. If you've got a really weak mob that you're creating, but it's really big, it takes a couple of hits and then suddenly just topples over. It's like the crawlers will be really surprised. They're like, wow, that was much easier than maybe that seemed to be. Or some sort of scrappy little quick mob, or even some scrappy little quick boss that seems like, oh, this thing is, it's a size of a cuddly teddy bear. You don't expect it to be as tough as it is.
Yeah, like Ralph, that gerbil, right? He's super small and it's super scary. So, yeah. But come up with a size. All right. type. Now, this is kind of loose here, right? So you kind of have, if it's like an animal-ish, it's beastly. If it's undead, it's undead. If it's humanoid, it's humanoid. But you can put all kinds of different types on there. It could be a construct, it could be an ooze, it could be a fae, so all the kind of traditional things. Then you can also kind of make up types, right? This is like flavor, so this could be I don't know, it could be, I don't know, what would be a really funny type to put in
Well,
there?
an example they have here is patchwork. So it's just something that's maybe stitched together, but you can tie the type into. You can sort of predict it with some things. If somebody gets a weapon that looks like one of those hooks that undoes stitches, that they can see the stats is that it does a whole bunch of extra damage against patchwork enemies. There are patchwork mobs. You're like, when is this ever going to matter? And then some sort of badly stitched together doll of whatever size comes running at them. They're like, this is the patchwork thing. The advantage of that is the advantage of being able to use a lot of different types and to customize types is you can give someone that very powerful unstitching weapon without worrying about it sort of undoing a whole bunch of other monsters in your campaign. If something is going to give a bonus against undead, the character's going to use it a lot. There's probably a lot of undead they go up against. But if you have something that is very specific in the type, you can really tailor the player experience to that specific type.
Right. And of course, it might happen to drop right before you encounter that boss for some reason. So,
yep.
Pretty typical, like silver weapons dropping when maybe you might encounter a were creature of some sort.
Exactly.
All right. So, but anyway, there's no kind of hard and fast rules on type, just so everybody knows. All right. Health bar slots. So, there's some general guidance, and then I also put table 50 in here because bosses are slightly different. So mobs get a number of health bar slots equal to their level up to 10, which is the same as crawlers. Okay. So if it's a level 2 mob, it gets 2 health bar slots. Level 10, it gets 10. Right. Level 15, it gets 10. Okay. So mobs get up to 10. Now, with bosses, it depends on the level of the boss, right? So if you have a neighborhood boss, it gets 10 plus the floor, whatever it is. If it's a borough boss, it gets 15 plus the floor. City boss, 20 plus the floor. Province, 25 plus the floor. Country, so on and so forth. So the reason why this is in here is because these bosses are just a lot beefier. It takes a whole lot more to wear them down. And so while they also typically will have more defenses, more attacks, they also are a big bag of hit points. So all in all, it makes them really, really challenging, even compared to a similar creature, so a similar mob at the same level.
Yeah, they're functioning a lot like a whole bunch of mobs kind of jammed together into one creature. So it's got a lot more health bar slots. They've got a lot more attacks that they make, one per crawler, things like that. So there's the way the math works is intentionally done to make a single boss a really tough fight, as though it were a whole bunch of mobs.
Right. And I think that's a fair point, in that, like, if you are a GM and you're finding that, hey, my particular boss is a little underpowered for my party, well, then maybe you can have a minion or two out there. But more often than not, if you're building the boss at a relative power level with this system, as we're building the crawlers, should be somewhat balanced in terms of, the crawlers are going to be heroic and they hopefully will succeed in the battle, but it's going to take them a little while to get through.
Yep. And then, of course, any sort of boss fight, boss battle that has some sort of trick to it or some sort of secret is all intended to sort of undercut some of the basic numbers to make things easier. There is a reward for looking carefully around in a boss of any tier, in order to find what it is that is going to secretly make that easier or undercut it or otherwise. So,
Right. As an action, one of the things that you can do in a boss battle is look for clues. And all the bosses that we have that we're presenting have some results if you look for clues. And we'll show you some examples of a neighborhood, borough, and city boss. And you can kind of see some of those in there.
Yep.
And while I'm at this, so we're going to show some examples from the core rulebook. Now, there are 3 chapters in there that cover neighborhoods and quests for floors 3, 4, and 5. In each of those, I think there's, I don't know how many there are. There's dozens and dozens of these things in there. And within each of those, there's also a whole bunch of mobs and a whole bunch of bosses. So if you don't want to design a whole bunch on your own, but we're showing you how to do that, you can pick and choose others from different floors, use them as they are, or even reskin them to make them slightly different flavor to use in your own campaign.
Yep.
All right. So health bar slots, and then level. And this is some general guidelines as to both where you typically find these level mobs and how much dice of damage their main attack does, unmodified for other things that we'll talk about later.
Yep.
So obviously, the first couple mobs that you come in against in the tutorial floors are relatively low level. As you get to floor 2, kind of goes up a little bit. And the die damage here, 1D, 2D, it's not a lot. As soon as you hit floor 3, that damage starts increasing to 3D. And then it's to 5 and 7, 9. It gets higher and higher. And this same amount of die damage is what mobs do, but also bosses will do on each of their attacks. And as you'll see, as I'll show some of the bosses, if you have a level 70 boss, it's got multiple attacks it can do. It gets a number of attacks per round equal to the number of crawlers. And if it's 7D, whatever per attack, that's a lot of damage a boss can dish out in one round.
Yep. And you can see the level ranges here are pretty wide, and that fits with a lot of the other aspects of the game as far as what your attribute is for its bonus and so on. It starts out with really small increments in floor 1 and floor 2, and then it gets to be much bigger increments. So the numbers get big when you get to lower floors.
All right. So on your stat block, another thing you have to put down there is surprise. And again, there's some rules around surprise. They're kind of repeated here as well. To calculate the surprise score for a mob or boss, it's 10 plus their int modifier plus the floor level. So if you have, say, we'll show some mobs and bosses here. This is going to be around, say, 14 to 18 for a lot of creatures on floors 3 and 4. And if you're trying to ambush somebody, right, use a skill or something, then this becomes an opposed check that you're making against them. If they see you already, you can't then go surprise them. So that's just something to be mindful of.
Kind of a sense of sensibility about that, right? If the crawlers have guns and are shooting guns and making a ton of noise or have a lot of bright light, then they're not going to be able to surprise anybody.
Yeah, if you got that torch spell going way up ahead of you, somebody's going to see that coming.
Yep.
All right. So similarly, we have to calculate evade again. And this is like, if you remember when we were making RJ, I automatically put in 10 plus his dex mod for
because you were used to making mobs,
right? Because I'm making all these mobs, and it's like, oh man, yeah. So for this, again, for the mobs, 10 plus their dex mod plus their floor, right? Pretty simple. That becomes their evade score. Again, lower level mobs, on the first floor, this might be 12, but a boss on the fifth floor, this could be 19 or higher. So it becomes much more challenging, which is one of the reasons why when we look at crawlers, which we'll kind of look at some next time, their skills start scaling up to add to the rolls, because you need that just to overcome the evade modifiers.
Yeah, just the
Evade scores.
basic increases for being on a higher floor for the
Yes.
evade is going to require that the crawlers are continually pushing their numbers higher, because that's the number that you need to hit in order to do damage to the mob.
All right. The basic move for a crawler or humanoid is 20 plus their step, and step is 10 feet, right? And you can take that step as part of an attack action or something else if you want. One of the things I like to do with move is, if I think this creature is going to be really speedy, then I'll bump it up, and I'll do it relative to how fast I think it should be to a typical crawler. So not a crawler like Carl has really got beefed up speed, right? But a standard crawler coming down to the third floor for the first time is going to probably be around 20. They might have a ratio ability that could bump it up a little bit, so maybe it's 30. But if I want to make a type of a mob that is good at chasing, then I'm going to make it 25 or 30. If I'm going to make a mob that flies and I want it to be able to really zoom, I might make it 30 or 40, right? So again, think about the type of tactics and attacks that your mob might want to use. And if it's a slow moving mob, then make it slower. If it's like a gelatinous cube or ooze or type of mob. But if it's something that definitely is going to do hit and run, yeah, make it faster.
Yep. You've got two things to think about when you're deciding the move for a mob. You want to have the environment of the fight, and you want to have the circumstances where move might matter. The environment of the fight, if you've got some sort of, old broken down warehouse with a lot of rusty machinery, if it's far enough apart that maybe the crawlers can't dart from cover to cover, but the mob they're facing can, that makes the combat a little more difficult for the crawlers. They've got to move around a lot more. If conversely there's a really slow mob and the terrain is such that the crawlers can dart from cover to cover easily, but the mobs are just kind of slurp along and can't get to them very fast, that's going to make it easier. So just changing the move can change a lot about what makes an environment easy or hard. And then circumstances are things like, well, if the mob is going to have something, maybe if there's some reason that the crawlers might need to chase the mob, if the crawlers are going to up against the mob because they want to take something from it and they might run away, its move is really going to be a real designator for, does the mob get away if chased, or do the crawlers catch up with it? Or vice versa, if the crawlers want to steal something and run away, is a mob that pursues the crawlers going to catch up to them easily or not? A lot of things, for environment and circumstances, toggle on where you decide to set that move.
All right. Damage resistance. And, we were kind of talking about slow moving mobs. One of the things I like to do is, if I have a slow moving mob that's an easier target, I might bump up its DR a little bit. Now, by default, damage resistance for a mob is typically equal to the floor number. And kind of what's interesting, and they kind of allude to it here, when that rage elemental came in because Jack is pissing all over the wall, right? He came from the 13th floor. Well, his DR was equal to the floor that he was from. That was 13, which, for Carl and the Metal Arc folks, at where they're at in the tutorial floors, that was virtually impossible to damage them. Hence, he had to use some tricks and stuff. Now,
yeah, 12 points of damage against a typical mob that shows up on floor 2. That mob is only going to have 2 health bars, and each one is going to be filled with its constitution, which at its best is going to be 3, maybe 4 if it's just like super sturdy. Maybe it's got a DR of 2. 12 points is just about guaranteed to take that mob right out. Whereas you take this rage elemental with a DR of 13, 12 points doesn't even hurt it. Doesn't even start to fill one of the health boxes. So it's a big swing.
Now, one of the things that I like to do with bosses in particular, but any mob, is think about what they're made of. If it's a beetle type of mob with an armored shell, well, he's got some more DR. If it's a squishy caster type mob, chances are he's got a little bit less DR. And I might take DR and move and kind of put them at opposite spectrums for the particular creature. So if it doesn't have a lot of DR, well, maybe it's quick and it moves around. If it has a lot of DR, maybe it's a little bit slower, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, but one of the things I'll say, and that's with all the things that we'll talk about, these are the base guidelines that we use for building mobs and bosses when we're putting the game together. There are some variation, and we have it some here, some of it intentional, some of it maybe not intentional. Like I noticed on something, oh yeah, we decided to buff up the level on this, and I forgot to change the stat points when I did that. Oh, my bad. Well, that particular boss is a little bit easier than maybe it could be. Other ones will say, well, you know what? Maybe this category creature is just a little bit stronger or weaker than the norm. And you can do that as well. You don't have to adhere strictly to these, but these numbers were designed to balance out everything else. And so know that when you vary from these numbers, it does have an effect. All right, stats. And so this is where it starts to become more interesting, because things like the number, your con mod that goes in your health bar slots, your evade score, your to hit score because of either your strength or your dex, right? Your surprise score, all those are based on the stats that are in those given abilities. Now, for a basic mob, they start with 1 in each stat, and they get 3 stats per level. Okay. So here at level 18, for example, level 6 mob has 18 stat points to distribute. This is on top of the 1 per level that already starts in there. So in total, it has 23 when you're doing that. Now, bosses have more stats based on what level they were. So again, when we looked at the boss severity table, right, we see that stats per level for a borough boss is 4, for a city boss is 5, province 6, country 8, floor 10. Now, I've only made up to city bosses at this point. I imagine I'll probably start making some province bosses before too long.
Whoa. Speaking as somebody who's in your campaign, John, you don't need to go that far. No, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah, they're pretty challenging. All right.
Well, I want to point out my example from earlier when I said, floor two mob is going to have 2 health bars, a 3, maybe a 4 as its constitution modifier in each of those. If you're looking at these numbers, you're like, but Ron, with a base of 1 and 6 stat points to distribute, I could have a level 2 boss or a level 2 mob with a 7 in, put all those points into con. I got 7 in each of my 2 boxes there. I'm like, well, yeah, you could, but then the mob can't do much of anything else with its strength of 1 and dex of 1 and int of 1. So that's why when I said it was typically 3, maybe 4, it's on the assumption that stat points are something that you're going to want to spread out. And when you don't, expect that the crawlers are going to be able to take advantage of whatever's weak. They'll be able to surprise it if it's low int. They'll be able to hit it if it's low dex, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll say, as I'm building mobs, as I built mobs for the core rulebook,
so many mobs.
I built or developed virtually all of them. So I maybe started some up and other people helped develop them, so on and so forth. We worked back and forth a lot on them. One of the things I very intentionally did is I tried to make sure that I was efficient with my stat spread to hit certain breakpoints rather than, I'm going to put 49 in a particular stat.
Oh, that's right. Because you translate them over to the pluses. Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent point.
So you don't have to do that as a GM. If you want to be really kind to your players, you could make a really high level mob or boss not as powerful if you came just below the breakpoint for all those things. But you know what? As a player, I'm not doing that. So when I'm making
I'm definitely
mobs,
not doing that as well.
yeah,
I'm going right to whatever the next threshold is
exactly.
and parking my stat right there.
So that's what I did when I'm just telling you, that's what I did when I built these guys. And then if I had like 5 or 6 left over, I sprinkled them a little bit so it didn't look like I just did go right to the breakpoints. But that's what I did. Okay. Yeah. So just so you know, these guys are very efficient with their stat scores. You better be too if you want to have a chance to survive. All right. All right. Attacks. Now, this text is a little bit smaller and it might be harder for you to read. You'll have to take a screenshot, zoom in, whatever. I'm going to talk about this a little briefly, kind of what it says. So, okay. So, remember, we had the mob damage table, right? We have the mob damage table here, and actually, let me move this up a little bit. Can I do that? So, okay. So
I mean, there's literally looks like a spot for it right there, John. Good job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So here's the mob damage table. Okay. Now, so say I have a level 20 mob. It's going to do 3D, typically 3d6. That's its normal attack. Okay. Now, if I want to make it a little bit tougher, he can do 3d8. He can do 3. If it's a boss, he might do 3d10. Okay. But if there's some other rider on this attack, for example, if it's an area of effect attack, so if it's a line attack, a cone attack, a burst attack, a blast attack, right? If it has some sort of area effect where it's going to hit more creatures, then basically you reduce that by 1 die. Okay. So if I have a level 20 mob and it has a 15-foot line attack, well, that line attack, because it's going to hit multiple creatures or couldn't hit multiple creatures, it's going to probably be 2d8 plus whatever to do it. Okay. Now, in addition, if this attack has some really powerful debuff that could happen to the crawler, say if the crawler had a major a fail on their evade check, or they chose not to evade at all, right? There might be a debuff that they take on. If this debuff is like poison or bleed, or they get the taint, and I'll show you what some of these things are, things that are pretty substantial, I would reduce that attack by a die as well, right? So it could be you could have a level 20 mob with a ranged attack that has a very severe debuff that is likely to occur. It only does 1d8 plus, say, 4 damage, but it affects a lot of creatures and it gives us debuff along with it. So when you're looking to balance these things out on your mobs and bosses, you want to take that into account. So in general, maybe have one attack it does that does full damage. And then just to make it interesting, have some debuffs that kind of make sense. And I'll show you, we'll show you some examples after this as well, kind of related to that.
And you got a couple different levers you can pull there. You could say, well, this would do 2d8 because it's over an area, but it gives a debuff, so I want to drop it to 1d8. Instead of dropping the number of dice, you can drop the number of the size of the dice.
Right.
You could say, well, instead of 2d8, maybe this one does 2d4.
Right.
Or maybe I know that my crawlers aren't going to be particularly susceptible to this kind of thing, so I drop it from 2d8 to 2d6 because it's just going to be a minor hindrance to my crawlers or most crawlers, right? So there's a little bit of sway that you have under the two axes of number of dice and size of the dice.
Right. And again, so these are general guidelines. It's not a hard and fast rule what you should do with this, but I think it's important to take these in consideration because it's really easy to make a super powered mob or boss that is just going to wipe out your party if you don't consider, these additional effects it could have. And so, just to kind of show you the type of debuffs you might have. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of these. Now, one of the things I want to point out, see, these are all the debuffs right now that we have in the core rulebook. Debuffs related to injuries. So long-term injuries, major and minor, and then major and minor injuries. These aren't ones that you can have mobs put on as part of an attack. However, if they critically fail on an evade, it's possible that they can get an injury like this. So these aren't ones you would actively put in on an attack, but you can still have one. So you have a mob that likes to reach out and grab somebody, right? And it does a bludgeoning damage when it does it. Oh, and if you fail to evade, you get held. Okay, that makes sense. Here's what happens when you get held. Things like that. And some of these things are relatively minor. So like if you become enraged, if you become queasy, these aren't ones I would necessarily knock it down a die for, right? You get stiff legs, okay? However, if you get the taint, you can't get healed. That's pretty big. If you get the burned debuff, wow, you start taking fire damage at the end of each round, right? If you get poisoned, you get paralyzed. These are pretty major. And if that happens to the crawler, that on top of the full damage is a lot. So you want to dial that damage back a little bit on that.
Yep. And then some of these you'll get a sense for about whether or not they are serious or not. You can take a look at the table, and if you're deep into the rules, you can look at woozy, I don't get to add my dex mod to a couple of things. But once you actually see it in play, you'll be like, oh, well, gosh, not being able to add your dex mod to evade checks is much more serious than it seems. So if you don't have a really good sense of whether, you first look at these and think, oh, that's terrible, or oh, that's not terrible, these debuffs are in a table because they'll show up a lot, and you'll see sort of overplay what the intensity and severity of them are.
Yeah, and it's good to know these when you're making the mobs, and it's also good to know just general play, because your crawlers are going to have the ability to apply these debuffs. So on the GM screen, I was actually just looking at that today. There are some common debuffs listed on that for folks, but I think just printing out this whole table and having it handy, it kind of fits on a page. I would just have it, until I knew them all.
Yeah.
All right. That is not in this chapter, so that's a bonus from this chapter, but I think it's very relevant if you're building crawlers. All right. So after you've kind of done all this stuff about your crawlers, oftentimes there's additional notes. So abilities or weaknesses or something about how the mob or boss likes to do things. And these will kind of be at the end. And some of these, and again, I'll show you some example of these. If I'm coming up with a special ability a mob or boss has, I'm trying to give it a kind of cool name that is indicative of what it does, but not in a very serious way. And I think there might be some examples in what we have here. But if there's anything else that the mob or boss can do that you want the GM to know, or whoever's running it to know, or you want to remember, make sure to put it in the notes at the very end.
Okay. Maybe we should do just as you ask, John, and show some examples.
All right. Yeah. So this first example here is, I like this one because it kind of shows a cool image of the art. And so here, this is a city elf, right? And you can kind of see the stat block. One of the things we have for all the mobs and bosses in here is we have this AI text in the green block. So this is like you as a GM, you can just read this in your best AI voice. And this is kind of what your players could expect for the AI to say. Now, before that, there's some general background about them, so you know a little bit. And this goes in regards to how they would act and stuff like that. All right. So this is a level 15 mob. And because it's level 15, it has how many health bar spots, Ron?
10. 10. That's the maximum.
That's the max for
15
a mob.
would be the wrong answer.
All right. Okay. And now, because it's a mob, how many stat points does it have to distribute at level 15? This is
15 times 345 plus the one in each.
So it's 50. Let's see if these add up to 50, okay?
Yep.
Oh, I got,
Yep. 45 plus 5, 50. Yep.
right? And
How'd
so
you do?
So now I have 13 plus 7 is 20, plus
20,
13 is
33,
33.
44, 50.
That's 50. So hey, I got the
You
math
did it
right
right.
on this. Okay. So distribute that. Oh, and let's see how they're distributed. Okay. So we know our breakpoints are at 6, 10, 20. At this level, 6 and 10 are the relative ones. And it
Mhm.
turns out with my 50 points, I have 3 of those, probably 3 most important ones at this level: strength, con, and dex. They're all past that 10-point breakpoint for the +4. Surprise, surprise, right? The ones for this creature that are less important, int in charisma. Oh, look at that. They're at or just past that 6 breakpoint for +3. So again,
You had some extra points
yes,
in strength, con, and dex that you could have put into intelligence or charisma to bring those up to +4. But then you got to think about the mob. You're like, do you want to communicate that city elves are as charismatic as they are fast? No, that's not what they're like. So let's intentionally keep the charisma a little lower. Let's intentionally keep the intelligence a little lower.
all right. And then if we look at their attack, so the butterfly knife, this is, again, for flavor, this is kind of like a dagger, right? And so if you look at the dagger, when we talked about it in the starter set and also in the core set, it doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does have armor piercing. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we're going to give him. So again, for level 15, what was the damage that this guy could do? Well, let me go ahead and pull that up again. Level 15. Look at that. He should be doing 3D, 3 dice.
Mm-hmm.
This guy happens to be on floor 3, right? So he does 3 dice. And so his butterfly knife does 3d6 plus 4. The plus 4 is from his strength mod, piercing. Now, the interesting thing about this, what type of to hit, what type of mod gets added in order for a butterfly knife to hit? Do you know? For a dagger?
Well, it should be dex, right?
It's dex. So 10 plus the dex mod of 4 is 14,
Mm-hmm.
plus the floor to hit, right? Now, the damage, we said it's 3 dice, and we're making this 6 here because it's a dagger. Pretty decent. Now, the plus 4 damage, where do you think that comes from?
Strength.
Strength
because
mod.
you put force behind it. Yep.
Right, exactly. A melee weapon typically has a 5-foot range, and then this one has a special armor piercing ability, right? Not much with it. Okay.
Now this also has it gives a debuff.
Yes.
So why didn't you adjust the damage dice down, John? We just talked about how if it gives debuffs, we adjust the damage dice down.
Well, it depends on how likely you are to hit this creature as well, right? So if it said, say, on hit, then basically every time you hit this guy, he gets a debuff, then for sure I would drop it down, right? But wait, it's on a major fail or evade, fail, or worse. So you have to fail your evade by 10 or more. Well, at this point, at this level, not likely to happen that often. So maybe we'll say at this point, we'll keep it a little higher. Yes, you could have brought it down. I would be perfectly happy to make this a 2d6. I think that's legit. But in this case, he's 3. So again, this is kind of a judgment call. This is a
it
city
doesn't
elf.
happen a lot. Yeah.
Want to make him pretty tough. His other weapon's a Desert Eagle, right? Again, the to hit is 14. Again, based 10 plus the dex mod. The damage, 3d6. Again, we're kind of using handgun, but for his level, it's going to be about 3d. There's no additional modifier because the weapon itself is the thing that's kind of making the bullet go. So there's no, if this were a thrown attack, then you would add a strength mod to it, but it's the bullet doing it. It's got a range. Now, with a Desert Eagle, it's a large caliber shell. We could have given it the blood debuff, but here instead, we're going to say, well, that thing just pushes them back, right? Again, with a
And that's
pushback,
not too bad.
not much
I wouldn't have
damage.
modified the damage at all.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then we have a note. Oh, fanatical. City elves are immune to fear, charm, and mind-affecting effects, so you can't stop them from doing what they're doing. Now, what do we know about elves in other game systems?
Oh, they can't be charmed or put to sleep
Yeah, so
or
there's
some of those other
some of those
effects.
things.
Yeah.
So we could have kind of put that in there if we wanted, but you know what? We want to make these our elves, right? And if you remember from the books, they were fanatic followers of Vepido. So again, for flavor, that's where we decided we wanted to go.
Yep.
All right, let's find another example. Let's see. Oh, have we ever heard of these things? A shambling berserker. Do you remember these?
Ew.
Yeah.
Man, I haven't ever seen a picture of one though, and now I'm sorry I have.
I know. I think that's awesome art. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to show this. Now, they're level 12, right? So again, this is not a super high level, but it's still in our 3D damage category, right? So if we look at its abilities, okay. Oh wait, well we could do the math on the stats. We showed you how to do that, but right. But here we have, it's got way more strength, and all its other scores are kind of wimpy. Go figure. Because it's
This is the problem that I was describing before about dumping everything into Constitution. This one's got everything dumped into Strength, barely anything in anything else.
Yeah, so it's con. Look at that. It's all ones. Man, this guy is so easy to kill. Go figure, right? And he's so slow. But one of the things we notice is that he is tough if he does get to you. Okay. What's his speed? His speed is 10. Your typical crawler can outrace this guy. No problem. And sure enough, in the books, that's what they do. Oh, they're just picking him off. No problem. But what happens at night? And this is where we look at the notes. Shambling berserkers are 4 times more powerful at night. That's right, canon from the books, right? So when the sun goes down, their con and strength mods are 4 times higher. Wait.
4 times higher?
What was his strength mod already?
+5. 4 times strength mod of 20.
You don't want to get hit by one of these.
Oh boy.
Right. And what was his con originally?
It was only 1, but it becomes 4, which means that every one of those boxes goes from being filled with a 1 to being filled with a 4.
And what was his move? It was just 10.
That's much slower than a crawler at 20, but
at night,
that goes up to 40, twice as fast as crawlers.
Yeah, so at night, again, trying to mirror what we had in the books, these become very, very scary, right? And they tend to travel in packs, so they get some benefit to that, in that if 2 of them are attacking a crawler, the crawler is then evading a disadvantage. And they're tenacious. Once they target you, they don't stop. Again, kind of mirroring, what was in the books. So take a basic idea from the books and try to, using our rule set, fit something that kind of matches it. And for level 12, these guys on the face of it are pretty easy, but you get them at night, and man, they're like super, super scary.
Yep. All right, let's see a boss maybe, now that we've looked at a couple of mobs.
A boss. All right. Here's a boss. This one's called the Dispenser, because it dispenses drugs or something, right? It kind of spits out this caustic missive stuff. So now this is a floor 3 boss. So how many health bar spots should a neighborhood
10
boss
plus 3, 13, right?
Right. Let's see if we got 13 here. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we got that right. Now its level is 30. So let's look at our boss severity table a little bit and see boss severity table. Oh, no, we have to, that's giving us the stats and everything. So we got that right. But let's look at this other table. I think this one shows. So if we're
30
at
tick. Oh, that
30,
ticks that just over to 5 dice of damage.
Right. And so, and where do you typically find that? Oh, wait a second. We don't find this on
No,
the
you
third
typically
floor.
find it on floors 5 to 7, but bosses are going higher than
Yes,
the
but
mob would.
these are mobs, so the bosses are
you're
slightly
going to find this
different.
on floor 3.
Right. Okay, and so if we look at its attacks, there's only one that does full damage, right? And it's their tail whip, right? So it does 5d6 slashing and has a little bit of range to it, and it gives the staggered debuff. So the staggered debuff is kind of severe, but not super severe. If it weren't for the staggered debuff, this boss would probably do 5d8 or maybe even 5d10 if I wanted.
Okay.
So, but because I'm giving a stagger debuff, which basically is going to limit some of the actions that the crawler can take, we're going to dial it down a little bit. Okay. We look at its aerial slam, right? You notice it has a modifier here, any hit crawler, right? It's not just failing an evade by 10 or more. If you don't evade or you fail your evade, you get taken down, which means you get knocked down, right? And so I'm dialing down the damage a little bit from 5D, right? And on top of that, hey, you know what? I'm going to buff up the dice damage on this rather than go 4D8, I'm dropping it down to 3D10. Again, trying to keep it kind of in that same damage range just to make it interesting, right? Now, the second one, Caustic Mist. Again, we have an area effect and splash, and if you if you fail to evade, you gain the burn debuff. Now, one of the things
just fail, not major fail, but just fail.
Right.
So
I had to drop this down a couple die because of that, because otherwise it would have been way too much damage. Now, one of the things that's interesting that we should note, if it's an area of effect attack, an AoE attack, even if you succeed at your evade, you still take half damage.
Okay.
So it's if you fail to evade this. So one of the things you should be mindful of, if you're going against a boss, it's generally a good idea to evade. All right. So there's a couple other things with this boss in the notes. It has camouflage. So basically it hides until it attacks in the first round. So it gains some advantage there. And then also it does a couple other things. It tries to attack callers in pairs, but it can also try to swallow anyone that's taken down. And this is why this aerial slam, which has the takedown debuff on hit, was reduced by a die, but buffed up a little bit in points, because it's immediately going to follow up with trying to swallow you, which has a whole other host of issues you have to deal with as well.
Damage over time, and yep.
Okay. But then there's a couple other things. It has a big head and beady eyes. This is one of the things that you would find information about when you look for clues that you'd have advantage attacking on him. Oh, and also this thing can fly. So lots of information on bosses. Now, if we go to our next boss here. So here we have the More Dread. Again, this is a floor 4 boss, right? Floor 4 burrow boss. And so when we looked at our boss severity, right? Let's see, boss severity. On floor 4, the burrow boss is going to have 15 plus the floor. So this should have 19. It has 10 across the top, it has 9 on the bottom, so it's 19. Hip bar slots. Okay. Now, because he's level 70, and Burrow Boss is getting 4 points per level, right? Four stat points per level. He's got a boatload of stat points. And you know what? 150 are happen to be break points. So sorry, but this guy is built to break you.
Just to hit with the 50s and the 100s right there, right across.
Yeah, so it's not as elegant, but man, I figured he doesn't need a lot of extra charisma to hit those break points. So basically, he got whatever's left over there. Now, and I'll show you this image here at the very end. But like his main attack is a huge ass sword.
Huge ass sword, all strength, all the time. Right. 7 dice, my goodness.
Right. And again, remember when we look at this, 60 to 99, the full attack is 7 dice.
7 dice.
So this Burrow Boss is not somebody to be trifled with. We look at his crushing step. Because this is a burst attack, his die is dialed down a little bit because he gets a takedown debuff. In addition, that's not very major, but again, reduce the size of the die a little bit from his main attack. So rather than 7d10 on this, we give him 6d6 because it's got a radius attack. It can hit multiple crawlers, and it's got a debuff with it. What's interesting in a lot of these mobs and bosses might have an attack that does no damage, but it might give a fairly significant debuff. Again, the Terrified debuff can have some major effects. And then finally, here's a note. Here's something that it kind of likes to do, right? So it likes to split the party, causing you to fall down when it does certain things. Now, this is like a giant construct where it can move train cars around. It's on the 4th floor in the Iron Tangle. So he's moving these things around. So again, a pretty straightforward boss, but you can see how these various things kind of get incorporated. All right. Finally, we'll go on to our next boss here. And here we have another boss that's for level 4 or floor 4. If we look at our boss severity table for this, this is a city boss. And so the city boss here gets 20 HP slots plus the floor. It's floor 4, so he gets a total of 24 slots. So that's 12 on the top, 12 on the bottom. And he's getting 5 stat points per level. So again, similar to what we saw with the previous boss. Now, previous boss was 70. This one is level 80. We have different breakpoints. Hey, look at that. We have a breakpoint at 200. Sure enough, we're going to hit that one there.
Right there. Yep.
And this is the Station Mimic. So if you remember, the Station Mimic in the Iron Tangle was pretty scary, right? Doing all kinds of stuff. And so this boss has lots of abilities. Again, trying to mimic that. So it's got some base attacks for spitting acid and biting, for bludgeoning things by sending out its different parts of its body and doing things. But it has a whole bunch of other things. So if you remember that when you sliced off part of this mimic, those pieces would kind of sprout legs and try to run back. So it has that mimic regeneration here, has minions related to that. This mimic is very strong, so it has some resistance to bludgeoning damage. But because of that, it has some weaknesses. And so you also see here, this is where I've included the clues that you can find if you search for clues about this particular boss. And so for all bosses, we try to incorporate three sets of clues. And so these are the ones that you can see. Again, here is the kind of AI AI verbiage as well. So this is something that would be very, very challenging for any party to take on if you did not have some notion as to how to tackle it with some of these clues. And then you still have to use like all kinds of tricks. This is a
Right.
level 80 boss, man. This is
You've
hard.
got to evade. You've got to evade very well. You've got to be really on your toes for this one. Yep.
Yeah. And, if you remember in the Iron Tangle, how does the station mimic get killed? It's a god that comes and does it for Carl. It's not Carl doing it. So, so maybe you need to finagle your way if you tackle it to do something like that. I don't know. It's up to you. But this is a kind of a cool boss. And for those of you who I've told about my Gen Con special, that special has a city boss that is on par power with this sort of creature. But with a whole room of players trying to tackle
multiple tables trying to address it all at once.
So we've had some mechanics to help deal with that. But still, man, it's got 5 DR plus 9 in each of its health bar slots. That means you got to do 14 damage to even get through all the way through.
That's right.
One of this thing. And yeah. Now, granted, Carl has some super special abilities that enables him to do some radical amounts of damage early on. And there are some really cool weapons that some of the other crawlers have. Still, it's going to be a challenge.
Yep.
All right. And again, just to kind of circle back to that mere dread that I was talking about.
There's the image.
Yeah, it's just kind of a play on a dreadnought. Dreadnought. This is mere dread. And that's his huge ass sword. So, all right. Well, this is our longest video by far. The last one was 56 minutes, and now we've gone over an hour. But I wanted to cover in pretty good detail how to make mobs and bosses. Obviously, we couldn't cover everything, but hopefully you got a sense for kind of what the core rulebook says for rules, and then our amplification of that as well.
And if you've got ideas swirling around your head for mobs and bosses, now you've got some of the tools to put them down on paper with numbers. So
for sure. Now, next week, what my plan is, what I want to cover, since it seems like they're keen on it, letting us do stuff, I want to circle back to races and classes. And we've made quite a few changes from when we initially covered it, when we initially built them. And I think for the better. There's a lot more classes in particular, and we've kind of combined systems a little bit. So I want to go over that in detail because I know a lot of folks, although the starter set's great when you come in level 1, a lot of people want to start off with races and classes on floor 3 and get to the fun stuff.
Or know what happens when they get there. And I feel like we covered ourselves. When we talked about what we'd done with races and classes, we said, well, this is as we know it. Final book isn't out yet, so we don't know how they're going to be. Well, now the final book is coming out, so we know what they're going to be. And we'll show you.
Yes, and this is something I was deep into as we're finishing it up. And I'm pretty excited about some. So I'm gonna show some of my favorite classes for sure. As
Excellent.
We're going through.
Excellent.
So. All right. Well, until next time, I'm John.
And I'm Ron, and we are the Dungeon Anarchists.